Hello and welcome to the Deep Track Podcast, an exploration of watches, trends, and culture with a few adventures along the way. I'm your host, Blake Bettner. This week, I'm thrilled to welcome Kenneth Lam to the podcast. Ken runs a watch brand called Arken Watches. It's relatively young, but there's some really interesting and unique ideas being put to use here by Ken, who has a background in design and in some other creative areas that he brings to life in really interesting ways in the design of his watches. These are watches that, they're tool watches, they're dive watches, but they don't really adhere to any kind of classic archetypes of the genre. And while there is inspiration in these watches, they do come together in a way that feels special and unique and new. And these days, that's something that I really embrace. Kenneth brings some really interesting insights as to the origins of the brand and his goals around bringing together some of these designs for the first time, as well as how that has evolved in recent years. His most recent watch is called the Alterum, and it's a really interesting watch. We talk about the development of that, its design, what some of the unique features of it, some of the challenges in production of it. Ken has some really interesting perspectives here on how this has all come together and some of the methods that he used to get the result that he was looking for. And the results, I think, speak for themselves. The watches are really incredible. I highly recommend seeing these watches in person if you ever get the chance. Not only do they have a really interesting and unique dial design, but also the case, the strap and bracelet integration, all of it is really interesting and worth checking out here. Ken is a very insightful individual, and I really enjoyed my discussion with him. I hope you enjoy it as well. Thanks again to Ken for his time. With that out of the way, let's get into this discussion around Arken watches, about some of these watches, and about the origins of the brand with Ken Lam. Enjoy the episode. Ken Lam, it's good to see you, man. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on the Deep Track. I've been listening since you started, so I'm honored.
Well, I appreciate that. You and I first met. We had dinner in Geneva a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago now, and that was kind of my first exposure to you and your watches. And I was really surprised by what I saw in person. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But for people who aren't familiar with you or your brand, Arken, maybe give us a little bit of an intro, what you're up to, and what Arken is.
Yeah. So my name's Ken. The only guy behind Arken Watch Company. We launched the first model in 2021, kind of coming out of COVID. And it's just been a slow, kind of steady development of like a micro independent watch company, basically. And we specialize in kind of affordable, practical, titanium, utilitarian watches. Yeah, tool watches, that sort of thing.
Yeah, those are exactly the kind of watches that I appreciate and gravitate towards. Your watches are very distinctive. I know there's we're kind of spoiled for choice in the micro independent brand space right now, and I think some brands have a harder times than others, kind of like standing out or making something different or unique. And I think you've really managed to do that in an interesting way in such a short period of time.
Thank you.
Especially given your background, you don't have any. It's not like you had been in the watch industry or anything like that. It was just something that you seemingly just up and decided to do one day, which we'll get into. But before we do, what are you wearing on your wrist today, Ken?
Well, it'd be weird if I wasn't wearing one of my own watches, right? So yeah, I'm wearing the Arken Alterum, but it's one of the limited edition ones that I made for kind of a selected armory group of people, and they were that's like an owners group that was started from the first kind of 300 watches that we made, and there's only 10 of these kind of blacked out Cerakoted ones, and I've got one of these on, and I literally live in it.
Okay, it's so this is it's a DLC coated titanium.
Cerakoted titanium.
Cerakote. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I know where I think maybe a couple of those are, and I've also seen there's a white dial versions. How many different variations of this watch are there?
So there's two general release colors, which is like the black dial and the anthracite gray. And then before we launched those colors, I'd sent out kind of a line of communication to the owners group and said there's going to be two made to order variants. You can order them now, and then once all those orders come in, that's it. I'll cut them off. And so 10 loom white loom dials were made, and 10 black cerakoted cases were made. So those were the two that were offered to the armory. And then at the start of this year, when we did our first ever trade show in London, I did a Chinese New Year limited edition release for that event, but also to kind of celebrate my dual heritage. Like I'm half Chinese, half British English, and so I did a 60-piece limited edition like Year of the Dragon dial, which is like a red dragon scale dial variant. So all in
Uh,
all, there's 5 versions of the Alterum.
but okay, yeah, this is a very distinctive watch, and it certainly made some waves since you released it. Before we get onto that, I'm wearing a Rolex Explorer 2, 16570, which is kind of I don't know, with the polar dial, kind of a classic,
Nice.
a great everyday wear. So, um, I love this Alterium watch. So, tell me about the concept of this. So this is, of course, it's complicated. It's got has a 12-hour GMT hand, and it has a day-night indication. So it's not entirely dissimilar to something like a Patek 5164 type of watch. Of course, far more accessible, which is great. So tell me about like where did the inspiration for this watch come from, and were you surprised by the response to it?
I mean, yeah, I was really surprised by the response. I mean, it was kind of I think a lot of people weren't really expecting it, mainly because doing a modified kind of movement at the price point that we operate at is doesn't it's not really a thing because from a business point of view, it doesn't really make sense, right? Um, but yeah, the inspiration for it kind of started because I when I first developed the first model, there was like no suppliers that really wanted to engage with creating this super affordable kind of titanium watch. And so my mentality behind it was I'll find a way or make one, right? And I had that engraved on the first 300 watches I ever made. And so going into the second model, I was like, how can I continue to push the boundaries of like what people could uh achieve or be able to buy at the price point. And at the time, I knew I wanted to go into kind of a travel timer, potentially a GMT. But as I was developing the design and everything, the GMT complications that we have now, like the new NH GMT movement and the Miyota 9075, they weren't available. They weren't readily available. They weren't in any models, and therefore they weren't available for like third party production. Um, so I stumbled upon a manufacturing company that specialized in like refinishing movements, and they were doing like the extent of refinishing was basically just making new parts to the
Mm,
spec that they wanted them in the sense of like say if you wanted to take like I don't know a Seiko movement or a Miota movement but you wanted a solid gold bridge, like I don't know why people would want that, but if you
sure.
wanted it, right,
Yeah.
that company would essentially just make that bridge out of gold and then insert it into the watch. So they
Got it.
had the facility and the capability to design and manufacture these kind of micro engineering parts, so to speak, right? So I said to them, would it be possible to create a dual time watch, but not don't overcomplicate it. Just if there's a way that we could mount a second hour hand, but allow it to lock and release from the main hour hand, essentially you could have the operation of 2 hour hands, right? But
Hmm.
the only thing you'd need then is to distinguish which one is night and which one is day.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the original concept. And I pitched it to them and they were like, well, we can try, but if we fail, obviously it's on you. So like if it doesn't work, right? Like that's your money. Like you're prepared to go down that route. That's entirely up to you.
Hmm.
So, being the kind of I like the challenge of it, and I liked creating something that's a little bit more unique and something that I want to experience. And things like the Patek you mentioned and other complications at that price point, then they're not something that's within the realms of what I would kind of strive to want to buy, even if I had the ability to buy them, sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I said let's take a swing at it. And luckily for me, I think the simplicity of how I approached the concept of it was easier to execute. There were a few things that we had to be mindful of, like obviously the locking and release system. preventing it from affecting the actual movement of everything. But
Mm.
with it just being a module that attaches on top of the Miyota movement itself, um, it's very easy to service. It's very easy to swap in and out because the actual mechanics of everything, the engine behind it, is still just the Miyota 9015. So it reduces or removes any of the long-term service issues that you would potentially have with something that's like
Yeah.
purely in-house, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's a very practical solution then, which I really like, and not to hark on it too much, but yeah, I kind of feel the same way about that you do about the watches like that Patek, and you kind of appreciate them for what they are, and it's an interesting solution that they've developed, and of course they've done it really nicely, but it's like ironic in the sense that because of what it is and how it's made, you almost don't want to end up like using it in the same way that you'd want to,
exactly.
like one of your watches, you'd kind of, all right, let's get this, let's get out there, let's put this thing to use, and it's not about the status of it or anything like that. It's really about the practicality of it and the functionality of it and the experience of using a watch like that, which I think is really important because there's an added not tactility, but there's an added like something that takes it a little bit deeper, that makes it a little more interesting, which I really appreciate about this watch. And you look at it and you kind of have to figure it out. We're like, oh,
Yeah.
what's going on here? There's a second crown there. What are these two holes there? And is that the date? And, like it's something that it's an experience to behold, and I'm sure use as well. And I'll admit I haven't spent time with one of these watches. I'd love to check one out at some point here. I just really love how this thing came together. So taking a step back, and I mentioned this just briefly earlier, but you didn't come into this with any like experience in and around watches. What was it that, that you kind of had inside you that was like, I guess I'll make a watch
Uh,
now?
it was it's kind of like I think it was a perfect storm in the sense of timing, right? Like not to pardon the pun, but like so I'd come from like a creative background. So I was doing like photo videography for a number of years and I was essentially telling other brands' stories, like other people's stories of the things that they wanted to create and the things they wanted to see in the world, right? And I'd always had this thought that I'd like to have an opportunity to tell my own story at some point in time.
Hmm.
And then when COVID happened, I had all the time in the world basically because we couldn't go anywhere. I was actually like when the lockdown hit, I was in the Philippines and they had like a guarded village, like they were issuing automatic visas and no one was allowed to fly and like it was a full-on lockdown.
Wow.
So I just kind of like knuckled down and thought, okay, what could I do? Like would it be a product or would it be um an exhibition or something that can convey the creative things the creative thoughts that I had in my head. And while I was kind of passing the time, I was already into watches at this point. I was um heavily into kind of vintage Seikos and Japanese watches, and I was doing bits of modification and I was doing restorations and all these sorts of stuff just kind of in my room.
Hmm.
And I was basically looking for a part for a Seiko watch that I wanted to build it into the watch. But at the time, the Seiko mod scene wasn't as it is now, where you've got millions of different variations of parts and bezels and hands and dials that you could
Yeah.
literally build anything you wanted. At that time, you could build it into something that looked like a Rolex, but otherwise probably not anything else, right?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so I was looking for manufacturers to potentially like make different hands or different dial to build the thing that I wanted to build. And basically came across the factories that made parts for brands, right?
Mm.
So I thought to myself, okay, like if I just spend a little bit more time, which I have plenty of, to design something that is completely mine, can I make a case and can I make a dial and a hand and a bracelet and all these things? And they were like, yeah. So kind of off I went basically, and I came up with the concept for the instrumentum, and the goal was to create like this full spec 300-meter like beta titanium dive watch,
Yeah.
and sell it for $500, right? And like everyone was like, it's not going to work because the cost is too low. And many of the factories rejected that, and
Hmm.
but one took a risk on me, one took a shot and was like, yeah, okay, like we'll try it. And then when we launched it, it was received really well. And my goal then was to only, make enough money from the crowdfunding to have another go at it another year and actually like try and establish a business out of it. And
Mm.
then the Ultra Room is kind of like set that stage now. And I think like
Yeah.
the reception of that has been amazing. Like I'm really thankful for everyone who's kind of supported me and written about me and talked about me, and I'm really appreciative to be able to kind of do this like year out, year on year out,
Sure.
and kind of moving forward. Like I'm already excited to do Model 3 and Model 4 and Model 5. Like I've got all these ideas that I'm excited to share with everyone. So
Huh. Well, that's really incredible. And before I ask about the watches, if you like looking back now at the that you all those years back, kind of thinking, well, I'm not finding what I want, so I'm just going to make it myself. Like, would you, are you shocked at how far it's gotten and how far it's come? Like, did you ever expect to like, oh, this is just going to be my thing now?
yeah,
Like
100%.
what started out as just like, oh, I just want to watch that that
Yeah,
I
it
want.
it it was it is a huge like it is kind of weird because like now, yeah, obviously I'm working on the watch thing all the time. But back then it was like, okay, I'd saved up some money and I thought to myself, okay, I'm gonna buy like my first like purchase, right? And it was either gonna be the 16570 or the 14060 or something like that I
Yeah.
really really liked. But with COVID, I thought, okay, it might be not the smartest decision to just dump this into a watch or whatever. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, maybe I could do a business, maybe not. Maybe I could create a watch that I wanted to create, but it turned out obviously I had to make 300 of them and just so I could get one for myself, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so like that was how it started, and yeah, the margins on the first watch were basically non-existent. But it was okay. Like I didn't mind that. But the reception and the motivation behind people that started to kind of pool around the brand and support and be invested in what I'm doing and be invested in my journey and stuff like that, um, that really motivated me to then be like, yeah, do you know what? I'm gonna do this now. Like I can keep going. I've got more designs. I've got more things that I think people will like, and hopefully just take one launch at a time and see where it goes. And yeah, it is
Yeah.
it is very surreal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like yeah, that escalated quickly, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'm you mentioned a few watches there, the Explorer 2 and the Submariner kind of from the the 90s generation. And clearly you mentioned you wanted to make a dive watch, a capable dive watch. What I appreciate about the designs is they don't really adhere to any kind of like classic archetypes of the genre of dive watches, which I really appreciate because it feels like I see a lot of brands doing that, and everyone's got to have like a watch that kind of looks like a Submariner or a this or that. And this doesn't really look like anything else. Was that by design? And is like you purposely did not want to make a watch that would look like some of these other classic dive watches. And B, like, where did you look for inspiration for these designs?
It's really interesting that you brought that up because that is kind of the underlying thing behind a lot of the designs. Like, even though I referred to the instrument and then as a dive watch, there was no real copy or anything where I actually, I wrote it out as, okay, this is a dive watch because I'm not a diver, and I know that a lot of people that wear dive watches aren't divers, right?
Yeah,
And but to me, the dive watch represents like the most uh robust form of kind of the sport watch that's available, right? Like
yeah,
300 meters or meters of depth equivalent is equivalent to a certain tonnage of pressure, right? So like that means that you can knock it up a wall and it's going to withstand more than say a 30-meter watch would just by design. And so my approach, like even with kind of the tagline of the brand, which is endure everyday adventures, it's the mindset that the reality of the adventures that we go on versus the adventures that we aspire to are slightly different. But if
yeah.
the tool is built to the specification, then it doesn't matter what you do. So that's why the watches they fit into categories, but they're not by design like inherently like vertical, like dive watch or GMT or da da da. And I don't think that, or at least I'm trying not to design watches that fall straight into a line because, like even the Ultram it's not a field watch, right? It's not
Yeah.
not a GMT, it's not these sorts of things, but the reality is it's like, okay, I'll build them to the specification that can do everything, and then you can apply it to whatever adventure that
Yeah.
applies to your life, even if that is sitting at a desk and going to the supermarket, or going to a beach and doing water sports or whatever it might be. It's
Mhm.
just it's just inherently utilitarian, and the rest is your story to write.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy thing to realize and understand about just like most of the people that buy these things, use these things, and enjoy these things. I know there's this certain kind of like aspirational marketing elements that we see from a lot of the main brands, and it's capable of doing this and that, which is great, but it's hard to identify with that for
Mm,
for most people. So, at the end of the day, they want something that they know is going to be capable enough and they like the way that it looks and feels. And I tell this to people all the time about the wearability of these watches. And if you have something that you want to wear and that feels good to wear, that you enjoy wearing, you'll end up like building more memories and more meaning into that watch as a result, compared to something that like sits in a safe, or that you're too scared to use because it was really expensive, or it's an investment piece, or whatever. Like it doesn't have to be these fancy historic brands or whatever that end up having the most meaning, because if you're not wearing it, then what does it mean to you? you know
yeah.
Nothing. So I really appreciate that. I would love to see more brands kind of take an approach like that. And it seems like these days, especially in the small kind of micro independent brand space, there's more kind of ambiguity around these genres, with them kind of admitting that this should have kind of a broad use case, and because of that, I think it allows you, or should allow, brands to take more, or embrace more creative freedom in how they design these watches without having to adhere to a single kind of design code, as it were,
Yeah.
of a
I
genre. So
I completely agree. I think as well, it's easy to fall into those specific verticals because then you've got an easy like transition to storytelling to a specific group of people, right? And then you
yeah.
can use inspiration to reel them into a lifestyle that they'd want to live. But I think for me, even from the beginning of not coming from the background and trying to make something for myself, I share a lot of, or I shared a lot of the thought process that many people go through, where they want to be the master of their own destiny, right, and start their own thing, and I think from an inspiration point of view, I've always wanted to try and encourage that as the inspiration storytelling aspect of the company, and I've been lucky enough to have people reach out and say, I want to start my own watch brand, or I want to start my own product based enthusiast driven product sort of thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've been really kind of like touched by that, and I try and to kind of encourage that as much as I can, and that's really where the inspirational element, I think, is where I want to put a lot of my focus.
But I like that you had the approach of, you just wanted to make what you wanted for you. And I
Yeah,
oftentimes find that the
yeah,
most successful things like are start exactly that way. I mean, all the way up to, if you talk to Max Booster of MBNF, like he just wanted to make things that he thought were cool for him. And if other
yeah,
people like
exactly.
it, great. But it didn't start out with like, all right, what can I make that a lot of people will buy and be
Mm,
interested in? And I think when you think of what can I make that the most people will want to buy, like inherently, the more boring it has to be to appeal
yeah,
to a broader group of people. Like that's just kind of the nature of it.
yeah,
And if you're a big brand with a historic design, you're kind of like tied to that. But like the position that you're in, like it started out with, well, I just have this idea that I just want something for myself. And if other people like it, great. And look at you now, like a lot of other people like it and buy into it. But I think it's because of that. You didn't start out thinking, what can I make that all these people will like?
yeah. It was very much a case of, if I could wear one watch for the rest of my life, what would it look like? And the instrumentum was that. It
What is
just
that?
it had all the things, and I mean, there are inspirations and references to iconic watches that I really loved. Like the hour hand is taken from the uh, uh, MOD issued Seamaster,
Hmm.
like the very wide sword hand.
Yeah, with the Peter Blake, yeah.
Yeah, so there's cues. I call them kind of Easter eggs. There's like Easter eggs throughout. Even in the Ultram, their date hand is very similar to the subdial chronograph hand on a uh Seiko speed timer, which is one of the 6139 speed timer, which is one of my favorite like chronographs
Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay. It's
these
kind
are
of like
like
it's like
little,
a teardrop shape
yeah, these are
type
little
situation.
like Easter eggs that, you might not notice, but also at the same time they still fit within the design language or the design DNA of what Arkin has with like teardrop markers, right? So it's
Yeah,
not out of character, but it's also like me tipping my hat to recognizing the fact that, there are people that came before me and there are designers that came before me, and I owe a lot to them just as much as owe a lot to a lot of the people that have given me the opportunity to speak about my story. So
sure.
it's yeah, I'm just as much of a student and a consumer of the space as I am like kind of, creating things in the space, and
Yeah.
yeah, I just love being a part of it, to be honest.
So how important was it to, did you have like kind of a hard price threshold? Like if I'm going to do this, I don't want anything to be over this price or and for reference, if you're listening to this and you're not familiar, all these watches are well under $1,000 US. Was this kind of like, well, we'll see what it costs to get this made and where it ends up, or did you kind of have a hard line of I don't want it to be over this before you even got into it?
I not so much of a hard line in that like it needed to have like a specific value. The only hard line that I had was with the first watch, right? Like I wanted it to be under $500,
Hmm.
and at launch it was under $500, because everyone said I couldn't do it, so I was kind of like, I'm gonna do it, right?
You
Like
gotta,
it was like I've got it now, right?
yeah.
But other than that, I don't have like a hard line, but I do approach my pricing with the idea that like, um, what would I pay for it, right?
Hmm.
Like, and I'm quite practical in the sense of the things I spend money on, and even if from the beginning till now, like with the watches that I make, I like to think of that the price correlates directly to the specification that you get, right?
Hmm.
My design is free because I want to be a part of this space.
Hmm.
It's more of that, like, okay, if it costs a little bit extra to have all of my watches thrown into a chamber and pressure tested at blah blah blah. Like a lot of brands that make, watches that are water resistant, not every single case is waterproof tested, but ours are, right?
Yeah.
So like that's an additional cost. So to me, it's like if I can justify all the specifications, the design and the name, they're my gift to creating something that I also get to enjoy. So
Yeah.
that's how I like to kind of go about the pricing, really. But then, yeah, also, the more expensive it is, the less likely people are gonna wear it doing the things they want, like you mentioned before. That's
Yeah.
a subconscious thing that affects people regardless of whether that's disposable income or not.
Yeah, it's almost shocking, like seeing the prices, especially now and over the past couple of years, where things kind of are just kind of going up at a, I don't know if an unhealthy rate, but certainly a rate. But I think what surprises me, it's when you see a price like that, you kind of initially look to the movement, like it must be whatever movement, and then you worry about the fit and finish, and I think that was the one thing that really surprised me about the watch that I had seen with you, the Instrumentum, is the fit and finish of everything felt like a watch that costs more than that. So, I don't know if it's like the suppliers that you work with or something like that. But was there anything in that process of getting the watch made, and even particularly the Alterum, now that you knew, um, like was there things that you had to discuss with your suppliers, with your manufacturers of, like, look, I want these kinds of tolerances, or you get a sample back and this isn't good enough, and you go back, like, what was that process like for you? And was it kind of a give and take, or was it just kind of like nailed it right out of the gates situation?
Um, it definitely wasn't a nailed it right out of the gate. I mean, the I would say I learned a lot more, and I was able to adopt and apply a lot of lessons learned between the first model and the second model
Hmm.
versus kind of within iterations of a model, just because like there are some things that you can't change without like throwing a chunk of money at it, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
And with the
yeah,
first watch, that's not something that we really had, right? But going into the second watch, I could out of the gate say, okay, look, this needs to be here, this needs to be this. It's like it's part of kind of building a relationship with the supplier and also like working with titanium. Like titanium is a lot more readily available now. But at the time that I was creating the Instrumentum, not many suppliers were even going anywhere near it because the finishing techniques just weren't quite there, and a lot of them weren't ready to invest in all the raw material, not knowing how many other clients are going to need to use it, and all these sorts of things. So there was a learning curve that was quite steep with the first watch that I could anticipate going into the second watch that was a lot tighter, and I was able
Mm.
to request specifications to a degree that I wanted. But there is always this back and forward of like, no, this needs to be better, this needs to be better. And even then, that you get to that point with a sample, and then when they make what 300, 500, 700 of them, the variance in every single unit, right? So like you then
Yeah.
have to filter through that entire process or that entire production and say, okay, this is not good enough, this is not good enough, these ones got to go back, these are good enough to go forward. Like, and you have
Yeah.
to do that at every single part. So it's like dials and hands and all that. So again, these are things I didn't know in the first round, but going into the second one, I was able to really tighten things up, and moving forward, I'm able to tighten things up again, and hopefully by the time that I'm in the position that I want to be like a lot more of the established micro independent brands, we
Yeah.
can uphold a real high standard at the most affordable cost then just by inherent learning, right?
Yeah, and what makes it interesting to me is the cases that you're working with. The design that you have is, um, it's unusual. It's its own thing. There's a lot of interesting angles on it, and it's kind of an integrated strap system there. So it's not a traditional just kind of like lug or kind of like stamp looking case. Like this, every part of the case, every angle has something interesting to observe. Um, did you ever like the lug thing? Like, so you made a decision right out of the gates. Like, it's not going to be a normal traditional 20 millimeter
Yeah.
lug span that you can just stick a NATO through or something like that. You're going to have to use like these straps. Was a bracelet ever part of that kind of thought process or discussion for for the new watch? If I'm not mistaken, it doesn't come on a bracelet.
No, 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 no. So
Like
yeah,
the first one you did make a
the first
bracelet
one
for.
did.
Like, and I can
Yeah.
only imagine because it's not like just normal links. Like these are, it's a
Yeah.
very, beautiful, strange kind of organic shape, right?
I didn't make it easy for myself, I'll tell you that. Like every person I've worked with from assembly guys and everyone else that they're when they hear the kind of things that I had to go back and forward with the factories, they were like, you for your first watch, you should have just done a straight like normal round case on a normal strap, and like life would have been so much easier. Like the manufacturing on the bracelet was just was so difficult. It took so long, and it was also coming out of COVID as well, so the delays were just insane. So looking back, I mean, I stuck to my design brief, right? Like I wanted it to be holistic. If that watch was going to be that one watch for the rest of my life, I wanted it to just be whole, right? And the bracelet to be considered as part of this like entire unit, the same way
Hmm.
like a hammer is like one piece of steel, right? Like it's
Yeah.
just I wanted to have that kind of design ethos behind it. But then, with it then becoming a thing and me saying, okay, like I'm going to start a brand now. I wanted to have something that the original people who essentially helped me launch this brand to have something that was unique to them. So that bracelet from the first watch is cross compatible with the new one, even though we
Okay.
didn't release the new one on a bracelet.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, there are some regrets in that like I do like wearing watches on NATO straps. So I was kind of
Sure.
like, do you know what?
Yeah.
Maybe I should have thought a little bit different. I mean, I did do an adapter, so you can put it on a NATO strap, but it isn't quite the same. But moving forward, I do have other ideas to do a regular lug watch at some point.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
Ultram is just, it's a continuation of that instrumentum design language that I really love, and I want to keep that to the point where I can make a new remastered bracelet with a quick release, because the first one obviously wasn't quick release. That's not
Hmm.
something we had. um Make a quick release bracelet, keep evolving it and refining the execution of the case and that sort of thing as titanium techniques get a bit better, and the price point can allow it. So
Yeah. So where do you go from here? Like, how do you evolve on? Like, you've got some like conceptually a really strong foundation to kind of build on. You mentioned a few other movements a little while back that weren't available at the time, the Vieto 9075 among them. Like, how do you move this forward, or where do you take it from here?
so with the instrumentum being somewhat of like a concept watch, right? Like
Hmm.
it was a test of concept, and it expressed all the design cues that I feel are quintessential Arken, if I want to put it that way. So I want to flesh out a collection that represents that design ethos before moving on to something else. And so with the Ultram being that first available, kind of readily available piece, I want to complete that collection with two other models first.
Okay.
Um, and so one of them will be very similar in case architecture to the Ultram, so it will share the same straps and share the same bracelet and that sort of thing. And then I want to do a regular lug watch to kind of fill the void that the Instrumentum left, because I said that I was never going to make the Instrumentum again. Like after I did 300, that was it, and I mean that, and
Yeah.
that's mainly because like I didn't feel comfortable continuing to sell a watch that I knew I could improve, because it was concept. It's like 300 prototypes. That's how it
Yeah.
felt.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'll revisit the Instrumentum, at an anniversary or something, like many, many years in the future. But
Sure.
it doesn't mean that something should be in that space. So I've got some ideas that are very different from the Instrumentum, but they can fill the same type of category. And then I've got something else that will sit alongside the Ultram as a little bit more of an elegant tool, right? You've got hammers and you've got paring knives. You've got, it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's having the tools in the toolbox. And so that's my current thing. I want to flesh out more other different types of products that titanium and apparel and these sorts of things, because I like designing things and I always have new ideas. So um that's kind of where I'm going at the moment. And then when I get to that point, I'm sure I would have crossed another threshold of enthusiasm and thought, okay, I want to do this now, and then go there and
Yeah. Yeah.
just go where the wind takes me, I guess.
I love it. So you mentioned that you're into designing things in the creative process. When you're not like deep into watch stuff, what else are you doing? What else? What other kind of like hobbies do you have? Or what else do you spend your time doing?
Oh man, have I have lots of weird kind of craft things that I always get into. I think the last thing that I got into, because sometimes I'm so into the watch stuff and I love it, but when it becomes a work thing as well, I have to find a way to switch off, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so like that would either be cameras, like street photography. I like my whiskeys. I like building like pocket knives, like Swiss. This is like a
Oh
custom Swiss
wow.
Army knife.
Okay.
So I'll strip this down and rebuild it. Uh, yeah, anything, man. Like I'll unpick stitching on clothing and add things that I want, like pockets or what that anything that can be taken apart, I'll take it apart if I want something added to it. And
Sure.
that's kind of what I fill my time with when it's not, watch related. I like tinkering with stuff.
Do you see a future where there is Arkin pocket knives that are titanium, or Arkin, hood lens for an X-Pan, or
I'd
something like
love
stuff like this?
I'd love to. I think like um with pocket knives, it's a difficult one, because obviously being in the UK, there's like all these legal things that you have to abide by, and selling those products online with like 18 confirmation and all these sorts of things. If I can figure out a way to do it seamlessly, then for sure I will. Yeah, I could definitely happily put Arkin onto these other things, because it's not like Arkin as a brand name and as an aesthetic, I feel like translates. And I guess my background in doing branding work and campaigns and that sort of thing, I wanted to, if I was going to start a brand with watches, I didn't want the aesthetic to be limited to that. And so, um, you know, titanium and a kind of utilitarian and minimalistic, but a little bit brutalistic, and all these sorts of things, I think they would translate well. So yeah, if
Yeah.
if I've got the opportunity to, 100%, yeah.
All right, I love it. I love to hear that. So you mentioned that you had been into modding Seikos and stuff like that. Do you still like are you still a part of the enthusiast communities around like other watch brands? Like do you still collect Seikos? Do you collect other watches? Is there any other brands that you like pay attention to that you really like what they're doing?
Oh man, I pay attention to everything, man. In the watch, I've consolidated a lot of my collection now, because I needed more capital to kind of keep like move things along. So
Yeah.
my collection is really really lean right now, but Yeah, I'm a huge fan of most, if not all, watch brands, to be honest. I'm always keeping an eye out on things that I like, the FXD that you got when that first come out, I was like very, very close to pulling the trigger on it, and I still
Yeah.
am. Every time I see it, I kind of really want it, and I go to a lot of the local Red Bar groups, just so I can try on other people's watches. So there's like, I'm really into to kind of a lot of the things that are going on in the space, and I'm constantly excited by the creativity that's popping up. And
Yeah.
in the space that I'm operating in with a lot of the smaller brands, it's really fun to see the things that are accessible now too, right? Like
Yeah.
I like the things that Tudor are doing and IWC doing, and the brands that represent the overarching industry. But then
Yeah.
from like a ground level, there are just so many things coming from like Notice and Laurier and like
Yeah.
Sangin and these guys that are just, throwing out things that represent or express their creativity. And that I love that too, because that's grassroots and that feels very close to home. And
Yeah.
they are
Yeah.
appreciating the same struggles that, I'm going through. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It's a real budding scene right now. I feel like, especially where you're located, too. There's so many great creative people doing this and kind of bringing their visions to life, which I love to see. Um, what was the last watch that you put on at like a Red Bar meetup or whatever that made you go, "Wow"?
um oh man, that's tough. That is. I think there's two on my radar that I really want because I tried them on at a Red Bar. One
Yeah,
of them is the like a 90s Tudor Submariner 79090,
yeah.
like a non snowflake.
Hmm.
That's one that I very, very close. Another one is I kind of want a Zin U50, but I want. So like the Zin U50 Professional, the no
Hmm.
date,
Yeah,
with the Destro crown. I'd
yeah.
like that with the date. Because
Really?
I'd like
Okay.
that with the date. And I know that sounds really, really weird because I used to be, a little, not a purist, but I like the idea of having like the no date, right? Like the clean, like
Yeah,
super clean no date sub or the no date FXD. Those things, I think from a symmetrical design point of view, that they're beautiful. But I found that every time I've wore a watch that didn't have a date, I always look to my wrist expecting it to be there, and it's not there.
yeah, yeah,
So I've learned about myself that even if I appreciate from a design point of view, from a practical point of view, like I actually want the date.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I love the U50 Professional. I think that's really, really cool.
yeah.
Um, with a date, I think it'd be perfect. So I'm in two minds to like reach out to Zin and be like, if I come and do like the factory tour and all these things, like can we arrange like a Destro version of this watch?
The
Um,
the the Zin Arken Date U50 Pro, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'd love it. I'd absolutely love it. So
That's what we
like I,
need.
I I just yeah, these brands like Zin is killing it. I
Yeah.
hope that they continue to stick titanium on everything else other than the T50 because that's gonna blow the whole thing wide open.
Yeah, I
Um,
know. I know. It's
so
crazy. You know what I would love to see is a return of like the EZM1 in its original dimensions, but in titanium would
yes,
absolutely slap. I
yes,
would love that.
yes,
And I love the original EZM is like an all-time favorite. But if they put a flat crystal on it, like the U50 has,
yes.
because the crystal on the U50 is magic. It's like it's you don't even notice it there. The legibility is
Mm.
just unbelievable. I like the U50 Pro as well, but my only issue with it is
That
that you
one
can
has
only it's the SDR bezel. You can only get it with
yeah,
the black bezel and not the steel
yeah.
bezel, which I like. Like I don't mind the black bezel, but there's something about that steel bezel that just feels Zen to me. Like I
Mm.
associate that with the design language.
Because you can
So
imagine the boat, right? Like you can imagine the submarine.
yes, yeah,
That's
yeah.
why you're like, yes, it's a
But
submarine.
the tactility of that metal and like how warm it is, like it's just it's magic. I love the U50 of course, and the date is implemented on the regular U50 I think in a really interesting way in that 3 hour like the proportions of the window
Mm,
and the white like it reads as just the 3 o'clock hour marker at a glance,
Yeah.
which it doesn't like, oh, well, the date looks weird over there. Like it just kind of is like a natural part of the design. So I mean, I'm a huge fan of the U50, so I can't recommend it enough
Yeah, the
for nabbing one.
T50 as well. I'd like them to put the Lego hands on it.
Yes, that's
I
the
want
other part.
Lego
Yeah,
hands on a T50. Like I
yeah.
know the sword hands, like I do love sword hands. Like, I stick them on my watches, but since like the Lego hands are they're just so cool and there's nothing like it. So it really makes it unique for what
Yes,
it is.
unique. It's brutal, and but
Yeah.
yeah, it's like that's what you associate. And those are the little things that I feel like you don't really realize maybe at the time, but it becomes like really iconic, about that watch. Like when I look at the font of the date on the Alterum, like that's a really interesting, like kind of blocky font there, and it looks like some thought went into that, and that's the kind of thing that helps build the Arcan aesthetic in my mind. Like it's those little details, it's the texture of the dial, like did you put thought into that for those reasons beforehand?
Yeah, the date numbers they're custom numbers. They're actually because the numbers that you find on the bezel of the instrumentum is a custom font that I
Is it
did,
okay?
and then I basically condensed that for the date numerals. So it
Okay.
is it's a custom font. I just as with the case and everything else, it's like if I'm paying to manufacture it, I should pay to have it custom. So I'll just take the time and go
Yeah.
through Illustrator and draw it out and get it exactly where I want it. And then I send it to the suppliers and they send it back and they're like, okay, is this where you want it? I'm like, No, let me redraw it and then I'll send it back. And then, it's a back and forth, but then, you get it to where you want. And the texture of the dial is that's kind of inspired by like camera grip.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I wanted to do that. And yeah, the first watch was just a flat like matte dial, which kind of lend itself or was inspired by kind of the matte dials of 50s and 60s
Mm.
Rolexes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Going into the Ultram, more modern, more more tactical, more tactile, and
Hmm.
yeah, that was the approach for that.
No, I absolutely love it. Well, the whole thing comes together really beautifully. So and I'm really excited to see where it goes from here. Real quick, what's your walking around like camera? What's your like daily camera that you like to walk around with?
Oh, the Ricoh GR3,
The
man.
Ricoh GF3.
The
Okay.
Ricoh GR3, man. I'm a Ricoh
Okay.
guy all day. Yeah,
Okay.
I when I was working in this space, I used to work to what the client specs were. So if they had a certain budget, that would dictate what camera we shot on so that we had the ability to, they would say, okay, here's a budget, here's a project, like go away, get what you need. And if,
Yeah.
if it warranted a Canon, I'd get a Canon. If it was like low light, we'd always go Sony. Like we
Yeah.
did these kind of strategies. And then when I started Arc, I was like, okay, I need to find the thing that I wanted and shoot with the limited resource that I had. So I bought Sony stuff in to shoot Arken. But I couldn't travel with it because it's so heavy.
Yeah.
And I just it kind of took away the fun of shooting photos. So I fell down the rabbit hole of like this not underground, but like this clicky kind of Ricoh GR world that exists, and everyone who are like diehard Ricoh fans. And
Yeah.
I kind of got obsessed with these street photography videos that were shot in like Japan. So I picked
Yeah.
up a GR3 and I've kind of been using that ever since. And I made a custom like body strap out of like excess NATO strap nylon.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So like yeah, I got like a long length of like NATO nylon and I made like a cross body strap for it. And yeah, that's my kind of walk around camera. I love that. I
Uh,
love that camera so much.
yeah, with all the hype around the Fujifilm, the X Pro 106 or whatever, like I feel like the everyone's kind of jumping over to that, but the Ricoh
Mm,
GR I think is also kind of, it's a similar form factor and has the same kind
yeah,
of like
yeah.
character and through that kind of stuff. Is there any good like are there like street photographers you mentioned kind of walking around in Japan and like that you pay attention to or that you follow?
What's his name now? Um,
I
his
brought
name's
up I brought up one of them the other week on my podcast with Steven. GX Ace he's the one that I learned about, I think, that camera from.
There's
And
a
he's
video with him and the guy that I'm trying to think of. Lintaro, that's his name.
yes, yeah, and
There's a
he's like
guy
in
with both of
yeah,
them. Yeah,
He's
they're in
just
the
walking
same
around.
group.
Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah, yeah. They just walk around like Tokyo or Osaka or whatever, and just shoot like random people, and it's really good that the GR3 and the GR3X is really good for. It really suits Japan, I think, because like the buildings are so close together.
yeah,
Like shooting on a 30, like a kind of 35, like you can get the space between the buildings that you wouldn't otherwise get. Because I like shooting with, I would say 40 to 55 is probably like my favorite kind of
mm,
range to shoot
mm-hmm.
with. But in those confined spaces, like you kind of need a 35, and
Yeah,
some things that like extend tall on like street corners and like you've got long signage that you want to get in. The
mm-hmm.
35 is kind of perfect for that. So um yeah, but the I'm pretty sure they're gonna keep evolving the GR to accommodate different. I think if they did a GR with interchangeable lenses, it would be very, very successful.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
it would probably have a price tag to match, I guess.
Yeah, well, shout out to the Ricoh cameras there. Next time you're in New York, we can go walking around Manhattan and do some shooting
Yeah,
together. It would be fun.
my first ever photo walk was in New York. It was on the Lower East Side actually.
Oh,
The
sure,
first,
yeah.
yeah, the first time I ever did like a photography walk was it was led from Reed Space. Reed Space is not there now, right? I don't think.
I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah. So Reed Space did like an organized kind of photo walk, and it was like this one British guy amongst like loads of like New York photographers that had like proper like seasoned guys.
Sure,
And like
sure.
they shot everything that they saw, and I was just kind of like in my own head, kind of still in awe of being in the States for the first time, and but yeah, there's so many things to shoot in New York.
Yeah, yeah. There's some like just little great moments and stuff like that. Right. Well, next time we talk, we'll just do a camera episode, and
For
we can
sure.
get we can go deep
Yeah,
on that.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, Ken, it's been a huge honor and pleasure just talking to you today. So thank you so much for your time and thanks for coming on, man.
The honor's mine, man. Like I said, I'm very, very thankful that you've reached out to me and said, would you like to come on? I was like, yeah, 100% I'd like to come on. Like you've had some really solid guests on here, and I was like listening the other day and thinking, oh, I hope I'm not on after Eric Wind.
Uh,
Like that's a hard act to follow, man. Like
well,
he's got.
you'll be we're recording this and you'll come out in a couple of weeks. You'll be coming after Guido Turani, the CEO of Parmigiani.
Oh,
So
great.
he'll be
Even
the
better.
he'll be the next one.
That's even
So
hotter. Okay.
no, it's been awesome to talk to you. Where can people go find more of you and more of Arken watches?
So Arkham Watch Co. on Instagram, arkham.uk. But yeah, I mean, if you can reach out to me anywhere really, contact page, email, and it's only me here at Arkham, so you'll reach me, and I'm always happy to chat and speak about whatever it is that you might want to speak about.
Cameras and street photography, even.
Yeah, pocket
And
knives,
pocket
yeah,
knives.
yeah, any whatever you want. Yeah,
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, I'll leave links to all that stuff down below. You got to check out Arkham watches, and these are watches that you have to see in person. Like the cases are really interesting. So I encourage, however that's possible, you got to find a way to see them. All right. Well, thanks again to Ken. That will do it for this week's episode, and thank you for tuning in. Until next time, take care.